You may have heard me say this before, and you may doubt its validity, but it is in fact true, that between the years 1980 and 2021, Nintendo had introduced no less than one new video game IP each year. So naturally, the years 2022, 2023, and 2024 presented a significant and worrying break in that pattern for folks like me, who are ever curious and fascinated by what new ideas Nintendo chooses to explore without the safety net of an established brand like Mario or Pokemon. Well, we can assuage that fear for now, as 2025 is putting us back on track with the upcoming releases of Nintendo Switch 2 Welcome Tour and, more prominently, dragxdrive. Why do I say dragxdrive is more prominent than Welcome Tour? Simple, really. Because Nintendo rarely iterates IPs conceived to showcase new hardware. Not never, just rarely. Welcome Tour reads to me less like Wii Sports or Pilot Wings, franchises born from showcasing graphic or control innovation, and more like Super Scope 6 or AR games, experiences that demonstrate a device's uniqueness in a low-commitment context. dragxdrive, on the other hand, is being sold to us as a standalone experience made to take advantage of the Switch 2's new possibilities, the way Mario 64 was made around the N64 controller, or Skyward Sword was made around Wii Motion Plus, or how ARMS was made around the Joy-Cons, I hear you querying. No, actually, common misconception. ARMS was built around answering the question of how a 3D fighting game could feel as intuitive as a 2D fighting game. The thumbs-up grip scheme came into play later, and even in the final product, it's not the only way to play. You can even map the controls to your liking, but this is turning into yet another patented talking sock ARMS apologist tangent. So let's get back on track. Regardless of what I just said about ARMS not being built around the Joy-Con's unique control scheme, the general public are absolutely drawing comparisons between ARMS and dragxdrive, as they're both competitive multiplayer games with new controller-created control schemes available and summer release dates within their respective platforms' launch year. Back in ARMS' day, it was unfavorably and, from my point of view, unfairly compared directly to Splatoon, a recent Nintendo IP that did the unthinkable and gained so much widespread success it entered the upper echelon of Nintendo IPs along with Mario and Zelda in practically no time at all. Thus, people on the whole viewed ARMS as a less valid new IP, calling it a flop despite its sales success and continued promotion, however slight, throughout the Switch's life and into the Switch 2's life by way of a juicy Switch 2 edition upgrade. The conversation around ARMS is shifting now, from Nintendo failed to make another Splatoon to Nintendo is making stuff like dragxdrive which isn't nearly as compelling as ARMS. So I must admit, there is a primal piece of my brain that finds catharsis in seeing people finally come around to praising ARMS, but I'm not thrilled that they needed another punching bag game to do it. Am I personally looking forward to dragxdrive? Do I think it will offer me a similar experience to ARMS in terms of fun gameplay, praiseworthy art, and intriguing world building? Or do I think dragxdrive looks awful? Do I think it will offer an experience not even close to ARMS in quality by way of mediocre gameplay, uninteresting art, and little to no world building? Friends, it's the truth that likely lies betwixt these two extremes that I want to discuss today. I've heard it said from a lot of people that their problem with dragxdrive is that it's too gray and bland looking. But from my point of view, that's a bit of an overblown description. Yes, I know, we Nintendo fans love a splash of color, but not every video game ever needs to go in that direction. Splatoon does because it complements every aspect of the game's concept. ARMS does too, but dragxdrive appears to be aiming for a concept that's more in line with the sort of indoor gear-based sports you play in warehouses, like BMX, skateboarding, airsoft, and, well, basketball. Obviously, Nintendo could have designed the game to be more colorful without that shade of cold concrete and black tire rubber permeating throughout all the marketing material thus far, and for all we know, there could be more color present in other stages or unlockable equipment for the characters or something, but either way, this claim that the game is too gray doesn't feel like the thing stifling this game's appeal to me. I've also heard some say that dragxdrive's characters are uniformly boring. Comparing its characters to ARMS' characters is no contest. And while I agree, I also think that's an unfair comparison. I made a video discussing Nintendo Switch Sports' new characters, the Sportsmates, back when that topic was relevant, and I criticized their design for being blander than Mii's, but afforded them some grace on the off chance there was an in-world reason for them to be the game's default cast. The game wasn't out at that time, and I speculated that a potential reason Miis were relegated to a costume option rather than the default inhabitants of the game's world would be because of world building in the game similar to Splatoon and ARMS that would necessitate an original cast of characters as opposed to an assortment of overt avatars. But now we know, of course, that that wasn't the case and Sportsmates are just ugly. And we almost had googly-eyed robots instead of them, and that would have been so cool. I am living in the wrong timeline. Do you know how long I've been waiting for Nintendo to finally bring back robots? But back to dragxdrive. The number one thing inhibiting these characters that isn't inhibiting the likes of Inklings, Animal Crossing villagers, or the Ring Fit Adventurers, for example, is the fact that they're all masked with, seemingly, the same mask. Plus, we haven't seen any truly stark differences in color or custom equipment. We've seen some with colored highlights in their gray suits, or grills over their visors, or cat ears on their helmets, but nothing more stand out than that. These guys are more Excite Bike than they are Excite Bod, you know what I mean? And this uniformity amidst the characters signals dragxdrive being a more straightforward, less varied experience than people would like it to be. If every character's body and huge hands were the same while their heads and fashion sense were eclectic, people might have had a more positive first impression. My first impression was this.
Is this a party game or like a legit game? I'm thinking, oh, robot, 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 robot.
Because I hoped, in vain, that Nintendo would finally give us a modern IP with a central cast of cartoonishly styled robots. They've come so close, so many times, why don't they just do it already? But I would quickly come to find out that this was not meant to be, and these characters, so far as we know, are not robots, but seemingly just ordinary wheelchair-bound people with big hands. I can imagine there being one or two custom outfits that could breathe a huge heap of personality into the dragxdrive character template, similar to the animal outfits in Nintendo Switch Sports, but the fact that Nintendo has yet to show off any such outfits in dragxdrive's marketing material, I don't have high hopes that such outfits will exist anytime soon, let alone represent the game's artistic identity, and by extension, world building. I mention that a lot, don't I? World building. What do I even mean by that? Well, the worlds of recent new IPs made by Nintendo EPD, like Splatoon, Ring Fit Adventure, and ARMS, have in-universe fashion, culture, industry, cuisine, character-relevant musical motifs, politics, interpersonal relationships, history, and perhaps most tantalizing of all, mystery. In a word, these IPs have intrigue that make me more deeply invested in them as works of fiction and products of artists, rather than just something to keep my hands busy while I listen to Oni Plays compilations. And Nintendo's way of integrating this intrigue into their games' worlds is particularly smart in my view, because it tends to reward very dedicated players for taking notice of it, but it doesn't insist that less devoted players even be aware of it. Splatoon's Splatfests for the less invested player are limited time events that incentivize increased playtime with special rewards. But for the denizens of Inkopolis, they are ceremonies with sacred roots that pay homage to the real-life wars of the past that built their civilization, echoing the same way sports have historically been used as proxies for actual warfare in real human history. ARMS' Party Crashes for the less invested player are limited time events that incentivize increased playtime with special rewards. But for the in-world ARMS fighters, they are tournaments sponsored by ARMS Labs to gather data, a totally not ominous motivation that surely has nothing to do with Dr. Coyle's prone-to-evil experiments that have on occasion threatened fighters' autonomy, volition, and potentially lives. Will dragxdrive do anything even remotely similar to this stuff? Probably not. Because if it were going to, we'd likely see that ambition baked into the visuals. There's nothing wrong with sleek, gray environments or standardized player characters. If the gameplay is fun, who needs much more than that? But if the scope of the concept doesn't extend beyond the confines of moment-to-moment gameplay, I can't see myself getting invested in the series as a standalone franchise worthy of continuation. Oh, also, if you have to use the mouse controls, I probably won't play often. I almost exclusively play games laying down in bed. I'm not buying a Nintendo-branded tray table just to play basketball. But wait, will dragxdrive be just basketball? When examining new IP Nintendo's EPD division have made in-house from the time of the Wii U to now, we see a pattern of those games all having a sort of default mode that each game was clearly developed to accommodate, but also a couple other modes clearly brought out of the limitations of the default mode to do something slightly different and interesting. Ring Fit Adventure was clearly built around the player's moveset in the adventure mode's overworld, and the turn-based battles, minigames, and rhythm games seem to have been brought out of that. ARMS was clearly built around standard fights, and skill shot, hoops, v-ball, and 1-on-100 seem to have been brought out of that. Splatoon was clearly built around turf war, and the single-player campaigns, hub world, salmon run, and various other non-turf war multiplayer modes seem to have been brought out of that. So my big question concerning drag-and-drive is this. Since the mouse-controlled wheelchair basketball is clearly the mode this game was built around, what other modes can be brought out of it? The answer to this question, potentially more so than the questions of art and world building, will determine whether or not I end up becoming a fan of Drag and Drive or not, I think. From what we've seen of the game so far, I don't expect to get as much out of the game's central mode as I have from ARMS, even if, like ARMS, the controls can be customized to suit my playing in bed preference. The types of games I spend the most time playing and coming back to are fighting games and racing games. And even if on its surface, a game may not appear to be one of those two types of games, they may be so in spirit. Pikmin 3, a racing game, where you must do your tasks in a time limit. Mario Tennis Aces, a fighting game, where you must defeat your opponent. F-Zero 99, despite actually being a racing game, a fighting game, because your goal is more closely tied to defeating opponents than it is to racing against the clock. Drag and Drive's basketball mode looks like it could go either way depending on which action is more prioritized, going after opponents or scoring baskets before the time is up. But either way, it doesn't look focused enough on either outcome to really entice me. That said, what could be brought out of this wheelchair control mixed with freehand movement for picking up and throwing things that would offer me the fighting and or racing appeal I crave? Well, I have a few suggestions. An actual start-to-finish lap-based racing game might be fun, especially if there are flashy obstacles to overcome/interact with, a la Cruise and Blast or Excitebox. Or an open zone setup where you do tricks or accept missions in the style of Tony Hawk, Jet Set Radio, or Crazy Taxi could also be a ton of fun. Or, oh hey, how about instead of basketball, we do dodgeball? And instead of shooting baskets, you just throw things at people. Yeah! Who knows whether or not this game will end up being robust enough to even consider offering other modes beyond basketball. Hell, we don't even know how much the game will cost yet. It's not even getting a physical release, apparently, but I digress. Drag and Drive is exciting to me in the same way ARMS was when it was first coming out, because it's a new IP from Nintendo for their newest system that isn't ostensibly a low-commitment tech demo, the way 1-2-Switch was and Switch 2 Welcome Tour will be. And the existence of Drag and Drive is even more exciting for me in particular because, while ARMS was following up both the once-in-a-generation hit that was Splatoon and the new IP goldmine that was the 3DS, Drag and Drive is coming off the back of the Switch generation, which, while it did have some gems, especially ARMS, it had far fewer new IP on the whole, to the point where it broke Nintendo's 41-year consecutive annual new video game IP streak. So even if, in its own way, Drag and Drive is exciting, I can't help but feel like it should be more exciting. And oh man, why aren't the characters cartoony robots? We were so close! I can easily see Rob on the court of this game. Nintendo, what are you doing?